Good morning. We will be discussing about coastal regulation zones. As in one of the previous classes, we discussed about environmental impact assessment. Okay. So while discussing that, so we mentioned like we will be also discussing about coastal regulation zones. Okay. So as in yesterday's newspaper, I haven't found any broad issue that can be discussed. So I thought this previous issue we can discuss. So we mentioned like we'll be discussing about this particular issue, but we haven't discussed. So I thought today we can cover up this particular issue. Okay. So while discussing that environmental impact assessment, in that class, we mentioned about this coastal regulation zones. So what are these coastal regulation zones? Like who regulates them? Okay, so what these zones are all about? So this is the issue. Again, this information where you can use in GS paper 3. We have this environment. So in GS paper 3, this information you can use whenever you're writing answers on sustainable development, or you're writing answers with respect to environment. Okay, especially this man environment conflict. So when you write answers that in this man and environment, there you can use this particular information. So as we discussed, we have the 1986 Environment Protection Act. Environment Protection Act, the 1986 one. So it provides different rules and regulations, the way the environment of this country has to be protected. Okay. So for that we discussed why do we need environmental impact assessment. So today we will be discussing about this coastal regulations. So as the name clearly mentioned, so this is specifically for the coastal areas. Okay, so we have 7,500 kilometers of this coast. Okay, so the total coast in the country 7,500 kilometers. In that 5,700 kilometers we have this mainland coast. The rest is surrounding the Andaman and Nicobar. Okay. So this is the total coast of the country, 7,500 kilometers coast. So this is one of the longest coasts in the world. Okay. So if any natural calamity happens, especially cyclones, tsunamis, okay, or in the coming future, unfortunately, if there happens to be climate change, okay. So it is the coastal areas who are the biggest sufferers, because if climate change happens, there can be an increase of the sea level. There can be a rise of sea level. If the sea level rises, so lot many coastal areas will be submerged. So ultimately, it is the coastal areas that will be heavily affected. So along with this long-term impact, every year we will be seeing the impact of cyclones. We will be seeing the impact of tsunami we have seen in the year 2004. Okay. So the coastal areas are highly prone to these natural hazards like cyclones, tsunami. Okay. So in this context, so we felt like when we are in this developmental phase, so we should also think about environment while developing especially the coastal areas. So if you have to think about environment while developing the coastal areas, you need some kind of regulations for that. So those regulations, the regulations to develop the coastal areas are what we mentioned in this coastal regulation zones. So the country, if you see, the whole country be divided into 4 regulating zones, especially from that 2011 notification onwards. So as of now, with respect to coastal regulation zones, okay, so 3 notifications were released by the Environmental Ministry. So under this Environmental Protection Act, one is in 1991, second one is 2011, third one is 2018. So 3 notifications were released till date. Okay, so it is the second notification. Second notification means the one that came in the year 2011. So that actually divided the country into the country's coastal area into 4 regulating zones. So what we call them as coastal regulating zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and zone 4. Okay, so according to the area, so we divided the coastal areas into different zones. So as we discussed, the ultimate purpose of this particular regulation is to have a sustainable sustainable development. That means on one side we are protecting the coastal environment, on the other side we are also allowing for the development. Okay, so in that context, if you see, as we mentioned, the coastal regulation zone notification 1991, it is the first notification. So the first notification that came in the year 1991. So in this notification, so initially they came up with heavy regulations. So how the coastal areas need to be regulated. Okay, so the whole coast, up to this 500-meter range, there shouldn't be any kind of development. So they took the whole Indian coast. So you should understand that in the year 1991, when the notification came, there is no divisions. Okay, it can be in ecological sensitive area like Sundarbans. Okay, or we have developed places like we have this developed coastal places, like we have some parts in Karnataka, we have in Maharashtra, we have in Andhra Pradesh, we have in Tamil Nadu, we have in Goa, we have in Kerala. So there are some places, some coastal areas, the coastal places that are heavily developed. Some of the coastal places in these states, they are not developed. Okay, and we should also think of this what you call towards the sea, off the sea coast. We should also regulate that one also. So in that context, the 1991 notification did not provide any of these specifications. It provided overall regulations to the whole coast of the country. So this is the first one, the first notification, the 1991 notification. Okay, so it's the initial one. But after that, after 10 years, in the year 2011, we came up with another notification. So in this notification, we started dividing the coastal zones. We divided the coastal regulation zone into total 4. Okay, CRZ1, CRZ2, CRZ3, CRZ4. Okay. So what is this? What are these divisions? So what each division actually indicates. So now if you see coastal regulation zone 1, you can take down log this. If you see CRZ1, so this is as per that notification, what we call them as ecologically sensitive zones. Sensitive zones. First one, ecologically sensitive zone means, as we discussed right now, this near to the Sundarbans, near in this West Bengal, highly sensitive zone. Suppose if we take Andhra Pradesh, we have this in the East Godavari, Krishna, that we have this Koringa. Okay, and if you take the case of Odisha, in Odisha we have this Bhitarkanika. Okay, Sundarbans. Okay, and we have this Ratnagiri Hills, Maharashtra. Okay, And I told this Koringa also. These are some of the sensitive areas, ecological very sensitive. Okay, so all these ecologically sensitive areas, they kept under the first zone, that is called as the coastal regulation zone 1. Okay, second one is coastal regulation zone 2, CRZ2. CRZ2. What is coastal regulation zone 2? So this is like those coastal areas that are already developed. Okay, so the coastal places in the country that are already developed. So in these developed locations, in what way the area need to be regulated? Suppose, for example, first let me explain all this, then I will explain the concept of tides. First, you write down these 4. This is with respect to developed areas. Okay. Next is CRZ3. This is with respect to the undisturbed areas. Undisturbed areas. That means the areas that are not yet developed. Undisturbed areas. Okay. So next is CRZ4. Next one is CRZ4. What is the CRZ4? So it is actually regulating the territorial area. Territorial area. I will explain this. What is this? First, to understand this particular concept, first let us try to understand the concept of tides. Okay, because if you understand the concept of tide, then accordingly we can understand these coastal regulation zones, because we have this in the coastal regulation zone in the CRZ, we have this concept called as HTL and LTL, high tide line and low tide line. Okay, it says like, suppose if this is the coastal area, okay, so here we have sea, so we have tides. Okay, so high tide means heavy rise of sea level, low tide. Okay, so high tide means towards the coast the sea waters will rise. Okay, so if these are the normal sea waters, if it is high tide, the sea waters will come up to here. The sea waters will come up to this particular point A. Low tide means the sea waters will be at this location, position B. So from high tide 500 meters towards the coast, this is coastal area. This whole thing is coastal area. Okay, because higher elevation. So from this high tide, from this HTL high tide line towards the coast, the 500 meters, up to 500 meters, we have this regulation. Okay, so this is what is the second one, the point B. This is what we call as low tide line. Low tide means receding of these tides. So from the low tide line towards the sea, 12 nautical miles. In one of the previous classes we discussed. In one of the previous classes, while discussing about UNCLOS, we discussed also this. 12 nautical miles means the territorial waters. So from the low tide line to the next 12 nautical miles territorial waters, this also need to be guarded. So this actually we discussed under this coastal regulation zone 4, CRZ4. CRZ4 actually regulates from the low tide line towards the sea, the next to the 12 nautical miles line. So this whole region also will be regulated, environmental point of view. Okay, so understand this high tide and low tide. First, let us try to understand the concept of tide. So how can you define the term tide? How can you define it? What is tide means? Rise of, okay, sea level due to the gravitational pull of moon and sun. See, we will be seeing the sea waves, but there will be a rise of sea waves towards the coast. So this is what we call as high tide. So there will be like descending. Okay, so this is what that means, reducing the sea level. So that is what we call as low tide. So how this high tide and low tide happens? As we all know, though it is both the moon and the sun that are responsible for this bulge. So let me explain here. Suppose if you consider this as Earth, okay, so there will be a bulge like this. Okay, so this bulge is actually called as, so this rise, this is, see, this is normal, this is Earth. So on Earth we have continents, we have oceans. The whole Earth is not completely covered with oceans nor with continents. So parts of the Earth we have oceans, parts of the Earth we have continents. So at the same time, Earth will always, it revolves around the sun, it rotates on its own and it revolves around the sun. Okay, so near to the Earth we also have the moon. Moon also we have. So moon also, it also rotates and revolves. Okay, so we have, ultimately finally we have the sun. So there is a what we call this concept of gravitational force. Okay, so we have Earth's gravitational force, we have moon's gravitational force, and we have sun's gravitational force. But if you see, though the size of the moon, remember to this point carefully, though the size of the moon is 1/100th of the size of the Earth, as we all know this. Size of the moon is 1/100 of the size of the Earth. Gravitation is 1/6. Moon's gravitation is 1/6, and the moon's size is 1/100th of Earth. Okay, though the moon's size is 1/100th of the Earth, but still moon is very close to Earth comparing with sun. If you compare with sun, the distance between sun and the Earth, the distance between Earth and the moon is very near. That's why it is the moon, it heavily affects the tides. So for high tide and low tide, along with sun, it is the moon that affects heavily. Okay, that's why accordingly we have different types of tides. Actually we have two types of tides, spring tides and neap tides. Okay, so the bulge will be quite high during these two times, but it is at spring tides, that time, that means there will be a heavy rise of the sea level. So how this happens? See how it happens here. See, this as Earth, this you consider as moon, here you consider sun. Okay, so this, you know the process, it always rotates, like it rotates and revolves. Earth also, moon also rotates and revolves. We have the sun here. So because we have the presence of the sun, so there always be what you call a bulge, a slight bulge. Okay, but remember, when the moon either in position A, or sometimes the moon also will come to position B. Okay, sometimes the moon also comes to position B. So position A and position B. So this position is what we call as, what is this position? Full moon. This position is new moon. Okay, so during both these positions, during full moon position and during the new moon position, so new moon means between sun and the earth, the moon will be coming. So that's what new moon means, no moon. You can't see the moon. Full moon means complete. Okay, so between moon and the sun, if earth comes, that is what we call as full moon. Okay, so during these two positions, there will be heavy impact of this moon onto these waters. Okay, so that means this is the normal this is the normal Earth, so on which we have these sea waters. So what will happen here? Here, this is what we call as the bulge. Okay, so there will be a bulge of these sea waters. That means the moon's gravity will pull the sea waters either on this side if it is here, or this side if it is here. Okay, so at these two positions, that means at position A and position B, these tides, what we call them as spring tides. Spring tides. Spring, we see, actually it came, the word this spring actually came, we got this word. There's a word called as you have to spring forth. S-P-R-I-N-G, spring forth. Spring forth means gush out. So you know gush out means, right? It will stretch out. So that's why it stretches heavily. That's why we call them as spring tides. So during the time of spring tides, it happens monthly twice, 2 times. During once on new moon time, another time on full moon time. Okay. So along with these two, something in another time, what will happen? This moon will come to another location. This is the location. What we call these locations? This is the position of the moon. This position you can consider as position C, position D. These two are the right angles. See here, the position of the sun, position of the moon, position of the earth. It's actually in the right angle. Same is the case with position D. So when the moon is at the right angle, see here what will happen? Then when the moon is at the right angle, then this is what we can happen. You can see this. Again, let us draw this diagram. Earth, moon, Earth, moon, sun. Okay, so all three at the right angles, Earth, moon and sun. So sun's gravitational force, anyhow it will be there, so that this is the bulge. This bulge will anyhow there. Okay, but here if you see this side, the bulge will increase. Why? Because there we have the presence of the moon. So we have the presence of moon here. So sometimes the moon will also come here to this location. Okay. So then here what will happen? This side the bulge will be there. So this is the sea waters. The sea waters will pull like that. So these two positions. So this happens after suppose we have this new moon. After that, in 7 days, here the position of the moon will be. So during this time, there will be again rise of this sea level, heavy rise of sea level. What we call that as neap tides. So total 2 types of tides, but it's actually the spring tides. See, if you take the case of spring tides, just to be discussed, if this is Earth, on one side we have the sun's gravitational pull, we also have the moon's gravitational pull. So that's why two acting in a what you call it actually amplifies. Okay. So that's why during the time of spring tide, it actually rises heavily. Now you understood this concept. So we have to, this is just to give you an understanding. Tides, now you can understand simply, tides means a rise of sea level. So how this sea level rises? Due to the gravitational pull of moon and the sun. So whose gravitational pull is more on the tides? This can come as prelims question. Whose gravitational pull is more when it comes to tides? It is the moon's gravitational pull, because moon is close to earth comparing with sun. Okay, so now let's come to the actual concept. Suppose, for example, if this is the coastal area Okay. Then slowly here we have the sea waters. Okay. Here this is what we call seashore. This is land, sea waters. Okay. So this is the coastal line. Okay. So this is the coastal line. This particular line. So when there is a high tide, what will happen to the sea waters? The sea waters will rise. Okay. If not, the sea waters will be at this position. Either sea waters are at position A or the sea waters at position B. This B, what we call this as high tide line. This A, what we call this as low tide line. So when this high tide line happens, when the gravitational pull of moon and sun is more. So every area, every region of the earth. Okay. In every day, see, every day we will be actually seeing the rise and fall of the sea level. The sea level will every day it will rise and fall. Okay. But sometimes when these three, when this combination comes, like when the earth and moon and the sun are in the right angles, or when earth, moon and the sun, when they are in the same line, that time the impact is bit more. Okay. So in that way, now we got to know the concept of tide. What is the tide? The rise and fall of sea level due to the gravitational pull of earth, sun and moon. So if it is rises from this line, what we call this as high tide line, then what we call the recent one, this is called as low tide line. So total two lines. So now under this coastal regulation zones, if you see in the CRZ, so there's a point that got mentioned that from the high tide line towards the land 500 meters. Towards the land up to 500 meters, there shouldn't be any kind of development. If there needs to be any kind of development, then you need to take permission from the Ministry of Environment. Understood that? So this is about high tide line and low tide line and this regulation. Okay. Now I told you about this CRZ4. In total 4 CRZs, 1, 2, 3, and 4. First is ecologically sensitive zone. Second one is what we call the already developed parts of the coastal area, and third is the undisturbed areas, like not yet developed areas. The fourth one is territorial area towards the sea. So this territorial area towards the sea, how we consider this? This we consider like from the low tide line towards the sea, the 12 nautical miles. You know the 12 nautical miles, what we call those were the line as territorial waters line. Okay. So CRZ4 do what it will do? From the low tide line towards the 12 nautical mile, it regulates. It regulates the sea waters also. So this is the fourth one. So total 4 divisions of coastal regulation zone. Okay. So along with these 4 coastal regulation zones, we also have another what we call that as, that is being called as island protection zone. Next is IPL, sorry, IPZ, Island Protection Zone. Okay, suppose we have this Andaman Nicobar Island, surrounding to this, we have this 100 meters line. The 100 meters line, this is what we call as IPZ, Island Protection Zone. Okay, so this is to regulate the developmental activities, okay, along the islands, okay, especially along this Andaman Nicobar Islands. Okay, so this is with respect to regulation of coastal areas. Okay, so this is the 2011 notification. Recently we modified that in the year 2018. The recent modification came in the year 2018 as we discussed. So in the year 2018, when they modified the coastal regulation zone notification, when they came with a new notification, there are certain points they mentioned in that. So in that what they did, as of now we have this regulation up to 500 meters. But in the new notification, up to, that means up to 100 meters. That means if it is high tide line, Up to 100 meters, there shouldn't be any kind of regulation. Okay, but after that, with the permission from the government, okay, within the list of the government, if it allows those areas, if those services, then government may allow that. The government may allow them in these areas. The reason why government has to relax some of the coastal regulation zone norms in the year 2018 notification is that it mentioned that, see, as we have to promote tourism, we have to further develop the coastal areas. If that has to happen, then we need to relax some of the norms. Okay, so that's why it somehow relaxed some of the norms in the 2018 notification. But environmentalists actually criticizing this because it affects heavily the coastal areas. So in the coming years, if there happens to be climate change, definitely it will have a huge impact. Next is, every year the country is highly prone to cyclones. So just recently we have seen the cyclone Amphan and cyclone Nisarga. Okay, so every year we are seeing the cyclones. If you stretch yourself too much towards the coastal areas, okay, if you not regulate them much in the name of development, then ultimately it affects on one side the sustainable development. Later, the coastal areas will become highly prone to these natural what you call hazards. Okay, so this is what the coastal regulation zone notification 2018. So this is also one of the regulations under the environmental EPA, Environmental Protection Act 1986, to regulate the coastal areas. Okay, so this is about coastal regulation zones. Okay, so what are these states? Because you should have a basic understanding of geography here. So that's why if you see at the end of the day, how your NCERTs will be useful. So your NCERTs will be useful to apply your concepts onto these current affairs. So here we have taken we should have the knowledge on geography to understand this better. Okay, so this is with respect to coastal regulation zones. Okay, but in yesterday's newspaper, I didn't find any comprehensive issue, but I got some issues like here. If you want, I can show you those things. You can see them. One minute. Let me show you. Yeah, let me share the screen. Yeah, as you all can see this. See, in this, you can pay attention on this aspect. One minute. One minute. I am just